The smell of salt and sea clung to Hiroshi's hands as he arranged the fresh mackerel on beds of crushed ice. Dawn had barely broken over Shinagawa Market, but he had already been working for 3 hours, selecting the best catches from the morning's deliveries. At 42, Hiroshi knew fish better than most people knew their own families. He could tell you where a tuna had been swimming just by looking at the fat marbling in its meat, and which coastal waters had yielded the sweetest shrimp that season. Best seafood in all of Tokyo, he said with quiet pride to no one in particular, adjusting the position of a particularly handsome red snapper. The market around him was coming to life. Metal shutters rattled open, voices called out greetings, and handcarts squeaked across the concrete floors. Hiroshi breathed it all in, even as he noticed 2 young women approaching his stall, their noses wrinkling slightly. "Do you think this one has the freshest fish?" one whispered to the other, not nearly quietly enough. "Maybe, but the smell is so strong. It's all over him too," her friend replied with a small giggle. Hiroshi pretended not to hear, keeping his eyes on his task. He was used to it by now. The comments, the wrinkled noses, the way some customers would stand as far from him as possible while pointing to what they wanted. After 26 years in the business, he had developed a thick skin, or so he told himself. "Good morning, ladies," he said with a practiced smile. "Looking for something special today?" The shorter woman stepped forward bravely. "We need sea bream. For a celebration dinner." Hiroshi nodded and moved to the corner of his display. "You're in luck. These came in just this morning. Caught off the Izu Peninsula." He picked up a plump fish with expert hands. "See the clear eyes? The bright red gills? That's how you know it's fresh." The women nodded politely, but he could see them breathing through their mouths. "I'll clean and fillet it for you," Hiroshi offered, reaching for his knife. "No," the taller woman said too quickly. "I mean, we'd prefer to take it whole. My father likes to prepare it himself." Hiroshi knew this wasn't true. No one who knew how to properly fillet a fish would choose to transport it whole through the city, but he nodded and wrapped the fish carefully in paper, then plastic, then another layer of paper. "To contain the smell," he explained, though they hadn't asked. After they paid and hurried away, Hiroshi felt the familiar heaviness settle in his chest. He scrubbed his hands with lemon and salt for the 3rd time that morning, though he knew it wouldn't help much. The scent was part of him now, embedded in his skin, his clothes, his hair. Sometimes he wondered if it had seeped into his very bones. "Hey, Fishman, the usual for me today." The booming voice belonged to Tanaka, a chef from a nearby ramen shop who had been buying from Hiroshi for years. Hiroshi's mood lifted immediately. "Coming right up, Tanaka-san." He began selecting the small silver fish the chef used for his famous broth. "How's business?" Tanaka asked, leaning casually against the counter, unbothered by the smell that sent others recoiling. "Steady enough. Yours? Can't complain. Oh, before I forget, we're doing that neighborhood festival again next month. Committee meeting is Thursday night at the community center. You should come." Hiroshi hesitated. Every year, Tanaka tried to get him involved in community events. Every year, Hiroshi declined. "I'm usually too tired after market days. It's just a planning meeting. No heavy lifting involved." Tanaka received his package of fish but didn't move to leave. "You know, Hiroshi, you've been in this neighborhood as long as I have. Longer, actually. But nobody knows you." "They know me," Hiroshi countered softly. "I'm the guy who smells like fish," Tanaka frowned. "That's not fair. To you or to them?" Hiroshi shrugged and turned to help another customer who was hovering nearby. He could feel Tanaka watching him for a moment before the chef finally walked away with a sigh. The morning passed in a blur of transactions, each one following a familiar pattern. The approach, the smell reaction, ranging from subtle to obvious, the business exchange, the departure. By midday, when most of his stock was sold, Hiroshi felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He was wiping down his cutting board when he noticed 3 teenage boys loitering nearby, snickering and pointing phone cameras in his direction. His stomach tightened. This was new and worse than the usual comments. "Excuse me?" he called out, his voice firmer than he felt. "Can I help you with something?" The tallest boy, wearing a school uniform with the jacket unbuttoned, nudged his friends and stepped forward with exaggerated bravery. "We're doing a social media challenge. Jobs that stink." His friends laughed too loudly. "I'm working." Hiroshi said simply. And I don't consent to being filmed. It's a public market, the boy argued, still recording. And everyone knows the fish section stinks the most. Especially the people who work here all day. An older woman buying pickles at the next stall turned to stare. A couple walking by slowed their pace. Come on, fish man, just tell us how you deal with smelling so bad all the time. Or another boy called out. Do people refuse to sit next to you on the train? Something hot and tight formed in Hiroshi's throat. Shame, yes, but anger too. A surprising, unfamiliar spark of it. You should leave, he said quietly. Or what? You'll throw fish at us? The boys laughed again, emboldened by the small audience that had gathered. Hiroshi looked down at his hands. Strong hands. Skilled hands that could fillet a fish with surgical precision. Hands that had provided honest service to this community for decades. Hands that, yes, carried the persistent scent of his livelihood, despite countless scrubbings with every soap and remedy imaginable. Before he could respond, a large figure stepped between him and the boys. That's enough, said Tanaka, who must have been making a second visit to the market. Put the phones away before I call your school. We're just having fun, the tall boy protested, though he lowered his phone. At someone else's expense. That's not fun, that's bullying. Tanaka crossed his arms. Now apologize to Sato-san. The boys mumbled something that barely passed for an apology before slinking away. Their entertainment ruined. The small crowd dispersed too, some looking embarrassed for having watched without intervening. Hiroshi felt their eyes on him as they left, pitying, curious, or simply uncomfortable. You okay? Tanaka asked. Hiroshi nodded stiffly. Not the first time. Won't be the last. Doesn't make it right. Tanaka leaned against the counter again. Listen, I've been thinking. That community center I mentioned? They got a piano donation last month. Old upright. Needs tuning, but it works. They're looking for someone who might want to give lessons or just play it sometimes so it doesn't sit there collecting dust. Hiroshi froze in the middle of rearranging his remaining stock. Why are you telling me this? Tanaka shrugged. I remember what you said at the New Year's party 3 years ago. You were a bit drunk. Mentioned you used to play as a kid, had he? Hiroshi couldn't remember. He didn't usually drink enough to loosen his tongue, precisely to avoid revealing such personal details. That was a long time ago, he said carefully. Piano's not going anywhere. Just thought you might want to know. Tanaka pushed himself away from the counter. Think about that meeting Thursday. 7 o'clock. After Tanaka left, Hiroshi found himself distracted for the rest of the afternoon. The piano in his mind was his grandmother's, small and slightly out of tune, tucked into the corner of her tiny apartment where he'd spent his childhood afternoons while his parents worked. She had taught him simple songs at first, his small fingers stumbling over the keys. Later, when his hands grew stronger, she showed him how to play the traditional folk songs she loved, and eventually, the classical pieces that made her close her eyes and sway gently on the bench beside him. When she died, the piano had been sold to cover funeral expenses. Hiroshi had been 16 then, already working part-time at the fish market after school. He hadn't touched a piano since. That evening, after closing his stall and storing the unsold fish in refrigerated cases, Hiroshi took longer than usual to clean up. He scrubbed his hands with salt, then lemon juice, then a strong-smelling soap that promised to remove all odors. He inspected his fingernails, his knuckles, the creases in his palms. The smell had faded, but it wasn't gone. It was never truly gone. Instead of heading straight home as he normally would, Hiroshi found himself walking toward the neighborhood community center. He told himself he was just curious, that he merely wanted to see the building where the meeting would be held on Thursday. But as he approached the modest 2-story structure, he found himself peering through windows, looking for a shape he hadn't seen in 26 years. And there it was, visible through a side window, an upright piano, its dark wood gleaming softly in the security lighting. Something pulled at Hiroshi's heart, a longing so sudden and sharp that it took his breath away. Before he knew what he was doing, he had tried the door. Locked, of course. He stepped back, suddenly aware of how suspicious he must look, a middle-aged man trying to enter a community center after hours. He turned to leave, but not before taking one last look at the piano. Thursday, he whispered to himself. Maybe. As he walked home to his small apartment, the memory of music followed him, drowning out for once the whispers and snickers that usually echoed in his mind at the end of each workday. Thursday arrived with a steady drizzle that turned the market's concrete floors slick and kept customers away until mid-morning. Hiroshi found himself checking the clock more often than usual, his thoughts repeatedly drifting to the evening's community meeting. By closing time, he had nearly talked himself out of going 3 separate times. "It's just a meeting about a neighborhood festival," he muttered as he hosed down his work area. "Nothing to do with pianos." Yet as he walked home through the light rain, he found himself taking extra care with his appearance. He soaked in a hot bath with special deodorizing salts, then scrubbed until his skin was pink. He trimmed his nails meticulously and combed his hair with more attention than it had received in years. From the back of his closet, he pulled out a sweater his sister had given him 2 birthdays ago, still with the tags attached, navy blue and soft, something he'd deemed too nice for his everyday life. The community center was a 15-minute walk from his apartment. Hiroshi arrived 5 minutes early, then spent those 5 minutes pacing outside, watching others enter with casual confidence. He recognized most of them: the noodle shop lady, the elderly couple who ran the bookstore, the young man who had recently opened a coffee place. Neighbors, all of them, yet somehow strangers too. When Tanaka spotted him from the entrance and waved him over with a broad smile, Hiroshi felt both grateful and trapped. "You came." Tanaka clapped him on the shoulder. "Come in, we're just setting up." The meeting room was on the 2nd floor, and as they climbed the stairs, Hiroshi found his steps slowing as they passed the 1st-floor activity room, where he'd seen the piano through the window. "Meeting's up here," Tanaka said, misinterpreting his hesitation. "Right." Hiroshi tore his eyes away from the closed door of the activity room and followed Tanaka upstairs. 20 or so people were arranging chairs in a circle. A few nodded at Hiroshi with mild surprise. He recognized their faces from years of market transactions, though he knew few by name. He took a seat near the door, half hoping to slip out unnoticed if the discomfort became too much. A middle-aged woman with short-cropped gray hair called the meeting to order. "Welcome, everyone! I'm Yoshida Keiko, for those who don't know me. I've been bullied into chairing the festival committee again this year." This prompted good-natured laughter. "Let's start with quick introductions since we have some new faces." Hiroshi's palms began to sweat as the introductions moved around the circle toward him. When his turn came, he stood briefly. "Sato Hiroshi, fish stall at Shinagawa Market." He sat down quickly. "Ah, Sato-san provides the best seafood in the district," Yoshida said with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you've joined us." The meeting proceeded with discussions about budget, scheduling, and booth assignments. Hiroshi said little but found himself listening with unexpected interest. The neighborhood's concerns and celebrations felt foreign yet familiar, like a language he'd once known but rarely practiced. "Now, about the talent showcase," Yoshida said, consulting her notes. "We need volunteers to coordinate auditions, and of course we need participants." "What kind of talent?" someone asked. "Anything family-friendly?" Yoshida replied. "Last year we had singers, a magician, that young girl who played violin. It's about community, not professional quality." Hiroshi felt Tanaka's eyes on him but kept his gaze fixed on Yoshida. "Speaking of music," Tanaka said suddenly, "has anyone used that piano downstairs yet? Seems a shame to let it sit there." "Actually, we're still looking for someone who might give lessons," Yoshida said. "It was donated by the Watanabe family after their mother passed. It's a lovely instrument, just needs someone to play it." The conversation moved on, but Hiroshi's thoughts remained with the piano downstairs. When the meeting ended an hour later, he found himself lingering as others filed out, chatting in small groups. "So," Tanaka said, appearing at his side. "What did you think?" Hiroshi shrugged. "Seems well organized. The festival or the piano?" Hiroshi shot him a look. "I haven't seen the piano up close. They want to?" Tanaka jingled a set of keys. "Yoshida-san asked me to lock up. We could take a look." Before Hiroshi could formulate an excuse, Tanaka was heading downstairs. With a sigh that masked something closer to anticipation, Hiroshi followed. The activity room was dim, lit only by the streetlight streaming through the windows. Tanaka flipped a switch and fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a space filled with folding chairs and tables pushed to the sides. And there, against the far wall, stood the piano. It wasn't grand or spectacular, a simple upright with visible scratches on its dark wood finish, but Hiroshi felt drawn to it as if by an invisible thread. Go ahead, Tanaka urged. No one's here but us. Slowly, Hiroshi approached the instrument. He ran his fingertips lightly over the closed lid, feeling the smoothness of the wood worn by years of use and care. With a gentleness that surprised even himself, he lifted the lid to reveal the keys. Ivory and ebony, slightly yellowed with age but complete and inviting. Do you actually play? Tanaka asked, his voice softer now, respectful of the moment. Hiroshi nodded almost imperceptibly. He pulled out the bench and sat down, his posture automatically adjusting to the height. His hands hovered over the keys, suddenly hesitant. It had been 26 years. What if he had forgotten everything? He pressed a single key, middle C, and its clear tone resonated through the empty room. The sound hung in the air like a question. I should lock up, Tanaka said, moving toward the door. Take your time. Just pull the door closed when you leave. It locks automatically. Then Hiroshi was alone with the piano, the silence between them heavy with possibility. He played another note, then another, feeling his way through a scale. His fingers remembered even if his mind had forgotten. He began a simple melody his grandmother had taught him first. Sakura, Sakura. The traditional folk song came haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. As the familiar tune filled the room, Hiroshi closed his eyes. He could almost smell his grandmother's jasmine tea, feel the worn fabric of the bench they had shared. When the song ended, he didn't open his eyes immediately, letting the final notes fade naturally into silence. Then, without planning it, his hands began to move again, finding the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It had been his grandmother's favorite, the piece she had insisted he learn properly, guiding him through it measure by measure until he could play it from memory. His technique was rusty, his timing imperfect, but the emotion, that remained intact. The longing, the melancholy, the moments of unexpected joy within the music flowed through his work-roughened hands, transforming them from tools of labor to instruments of beauty. When he finally stopped, his heart pounding and his breath coming faster, he realized his cheeks were wet. He wiped them hastily with the back of his hand, embarrassed even with no one to witness his emotion. Well, he whispered to the empty room. That was something. Over the next week, Hiroshi found himself returning to the community center each evening after work. The first time he knocked on Yoshida-san's office door and asked formally if he might use the piano occasionally. She had seemed delighted by the request. Of course. Are you a teacher, Sato-san? No, he'd said quickly. Just for myself. I used to play. The door is always open until 9, she told him, handing him a copy of the activity room schedule. Just work around the classes. Each evening, Hiroshi would clean himself as thoroughly as possible, changing into fresh clothes before making his way to the community center. He would nod politely to whoever was at the reception desk, then slip into the activity room during its unscheduled hours. Sometimes other people were there, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a couple of students studying at a table, but mostly, he had the room to himself. He began with simple exercises to rebuild his finger strength and dexterity. Scales, arpeggios, basic études. Then he would move on to the pieces he remembered, stumbling through them at first, then with increasing fluidity as muscle memory awakened. He kept the volume soft, self-conscious about his playing being overheard. But music has a way of finding listeners. On his 5th evening, Hiroshi was working through a Bach prelude when he realized a small group had gathered near the door. 3 elderly women who had been attending a calligraphy class down the hall. He stopped abruptly when he noticed them. Please don't stop, one of them said, her eyes bright behind thick glasses. It's been years since I've heard that played live. Hiroshi felt heat rise to his face. I'm just practicing. I'm very out of practice. It's lovely, another woman insisted. We teach calligraphy on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Perhaps you could play while we work sometime? The students might enjoy it. Before he could think of a polite way to refuse, Hiroshi found himself agreeing. The women smiled and left him to his practice, but something had shifted. His private reconnection with music had, without his planning or permission, begun to weave him back into the community fabric. That night, walking home under a clear sky dotted with stars, Hiroshi realized something strange. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the smell of fish that clung to him. His mind was filled instead with music, with Bach and Chopin and the possibilities of what his hands might remember next. For those precious evening hours at the piano, he wasn't the fish man. He was simply a man who played music. And somehow that felt like enough. By the third week of Hiroshi's evening piano sessions, word had spread through the neighborhood like ripples in a pond. The calligraphy class had indeed begun leaving their door open to let his music drift down the hallway. The pottery group on Wednesdays asked if he might play during their workshop. Even the young mothers from the afternoon playgroup left notes thanking him for the lullabies that had drifted upstairs and soothed their fussy babies. Hiroshi accepted these requests with a mixture of embarrassment and quiet pleasure. He still kept his head down at the market, still endured the occasional comments about his smell. But now there was something else, a small flame of pride that burned beneath his ribs. "You're becoming quite the celebrity," Tanaka teased one morning, stopping by Hiroshi's stall for his regular order. "Hardly," Hiroshi replied, carefully wrapping sea bream. "I'm just playing an old piano in an empty room. Not so empty anymore from what I hear." Tanaka leaned against the counter. "Yoshida-san says you've got quite a fan club forming." Hiroshi felt his face grow warm. "They're just being polite. Maybe, or maybe you're actually good." Tanaka accepted his package of fish. "By the way, the festival committee is still looking for acts for the talent showcase." "No," Hiroshi said immediately, his stomach tightening at the thought. "Playing alone or for a few people is one thing. A public performance is different," Tanaka shrugged. "Just thought I'd mention it. Deadline for signups is next Friday." After Tanaka left, Hiroshi found himself distracted, his movements mechanical as he served customers. The idea of performing at the festival, in front of the entire neighborhood, in front of people who knew him only as the fish seller, was terrifying. And yet a small voice inside him wondered, what if? That evening he arrived at the community center to find a handwritten note taped to the activity room door. "Piano unavailable tonight. Maintenance. Sorry for the inconvenience." Management disappointment washed over him, sharper than he expected. He'd been looking forward to playing all day, had already planned which pieces to practice. Now he stood in the hallway, unsure what to do with his evening. "Sato-san." Yoshida appeared from her office. "I'm glad I caught you. The tuner is working on the piano. It should be ready by tomorrow." "Oh, that's good." Hiroshi shifted awkwardly. "I'll come back then." "Actually," Yoshida said, "I wondered if you might help me with something while you're here. We're sorting through donated items for the festival sale, and another pair of hands would be welcome." Before he could form an excuse, Hiroshi found himself following Yoshida to a storage room where 3 other volunteers were unpacking boxes and sorting items into categories. Clothing, housewares, books and toys, everyone. "You know Sato-san from the market, yes? And now our community center pianist." Yoshida introduced him with a warm smile. The others greeted him with nods and smiles that held no trace of the wrinkled noses he was accustomed to at the market. Here in this context, he was someone different. "I'm not really a pianist," he felt compelled to clarify. "I just play sometimes." "You play beautifully," said an elderly man sorting books. "My wife and I have been enjoying your afternoon performances. She used to play too before her arthritis got bad." "Oh," Hiroshi said, genuinely surprised. "Thank you." For the next 2 hours, Hiroshi sorted alongside his neighbors. The conversation flowed around him, occasionally including him with a question or comment, but never forcing him to be the center of attention. It was, he realized, the longest social interaction he'd had in years that didn't involve a commercial transaction. As they worked, the festival became the main topic of discussion. Who was running which booth, what food would be offered, which local businesses had donated prizes for the games, and the talent showcase is coming together nicely, Yoshida said, checking items off a list. "We have 10 acts so far. Any musicians?" the elderly man asked. "A teenage rock band, a flute player, and a mother-daughter singing duo," Yoshida replied. "But no pianists." She glanced meaningfully at Hiroshi, who pretended to be deeply absorbed in sorting kitchen utensils. When the work was done and the volunteers were preparing to leave, the elderly man approached Hiroshi. "I'm Nakamura," he said, extending his hand. "My wife and I live in the apartment building across from the market. We've been buying fish from you for years." Hiroshi shook his hand, searching his memory. "The red snapper on Thursdays?" Nakamura beamed. "That's right. You always remember." "And I always save the best piece for you," Hiroshi said with a small smile. "I know you do. That's why we never go anywhere else, even though..." Nakamura trailed off. Looking embarrassed? Even though there are other fish sellers who don't smell as strongly, Hiroshi finished for him. His voice matter of fact. Nakamura looked uncomfortable. That's not what I was going to say. It's all right, Hiroshi said. It's the truth. I know how I smell even when I try to wash it away. What I was going to say, Nakamura continued firmly, is even though there are other vendors closer to our building, the walk is getting harder for my wife, but she insists on your fish. Hiroshi felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Please tell her I'm grateful for her loyalty. Tell her yourself, Nakamura said. She'd love to meet the man behind the music she enjoys so much. Why don't you come for tea sometime? Sunday afternoons were always home. The invitation was so unexpected that Hiroshi found himself agreeing before he could think of a reason to decline. The next evening, the piano had been tuned to perfection. Hiroshi sat at the bench, running his fingers over the keys, appreciating the crisp, clear sound of each note. The room was empty except for him, the pottery class having finished early. He began with his usual warm-up exercises, then moved into the pieces he had been practicing. The Chopin nocturne flowed from his fingers more smoothly than ever, the freshly tuned piano responding to his touch with new sensitivity. Halfway through, he became aware of someone listening from the doorway. Without stopping, he glanced up to see Yoshida, a thoughtful expression on her face. When he finished, she applauded softly. That was beautiful, Sato-san, truly. Thank you for having the piano tuned, he said, closing the lid gently. It makes a difference. I have a confession to make, Yoshida said, entering the room and taking a seat nearby. There was no maintenance scheduled yesterday. I arranged for the tuner to come because I wanted you to have a properly tuned instrument. And, she added with a small smile, I wanted you to meet some of your admirers. Hiroshi stared at her, processing this information. You tricked me? I facilitated a community connection, she corrected, eyes twinkling. Was it so terrible sorting donations with your neighbors? No, he admitted. It was nice. Sato-san, Yoshida said, her expression growing serious. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I've bought fish from you at least once a week for most of that time. But until you started playing that piano, I never knew who you really were. I'm still just a fishmonger, Hiroshi said quietly. You're not just anything, Yoshida replied firmly. None of us are. That's what community is about, seeing each other fully. She stood up, straightening her cardigan. The talent showcase needs a pianist. You don't have to decide right now, but promise me you'll think about it. After she left, Hiroshi remained at the piano, his fingers resting lightly on the closed lid. The idea of performing publicly still terrified him, but something had shifted. For the first time, he was being seen, really seen by his community, as something more than the man who smelled of fish. Sunday afternoon found Hiroshi standing outside the Nakamura's apartment building, a small box of wagashi sweets in his hand. He had bathed thoroughly, scrubbed his hands with salt and lemon, and put on his best clothes, but still, he worried that the lingering scent of his profession would be off-putting in the close quarters of their home. He had nearly talked himself into leaving when the building door opened and Nakamura appeared. Ah, Sato-san. Perfect timing. Come up, come up. Yuki has been looking forward to meeting you all day. Mrs. Nakamura was tiny and bird-like, her hands visibly gnarled with arthritis, but her smile was warm as she welcomed him. Their apartment was small but immaculate, with a view of the market street from the living room window. So we can see when the best fish seller opens his stall, Mrs. Nakamura explained, pouring tea with careful movements. You can see my stall from here, Hiroshi asked, surprised. Every morning, she confirmed. For 20 years now, I've watched you set up. Always the first one there, always so careful with your display. The realization that he had been observed all these years, not with disgust or mockery, but with appreciation, left Hiroshi momentarily speechless. The conversation flowed more easily than he expected. The Nakamuras asked about his piano playing, and he found himself telling them about his grandmother, about the small apartment where he had first learned to play. In turn, they shared stories of the neighborhood's history, of changes they had witnessed over decades. You should play at the festival, Mrs. Nakamura said, as Hiroshi was preparing to leave. I would come to hear you even though crowds are difficult for me these days. I haven't decided yet, Hiroshi admitted. "What's holding you back?" she asked gently. Hiroshi hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm afraid they'll only see and smell the fishmonger. That they'll laugh." Mrs. Nakamura considered this, then reached out with her twisted hands to take one of his. "These hands have cut fish for decades," she said, examining his calloused palm. "And these same hands create beautiful music. Both are worthy of respect." On his walk home, Hiroshi found himself thinking about her words, turning them over in his mind like smooth stones. Both worthy of respect. Both part of who he was. When he passed the community center, he paused, looking at the bulletin board outside where festival announcements were posted. The sign-up sheet for the talent showcase was there, protected by a plastic cover, with several names already listed. Before he could overthink it, Hiroshi uncapped the attached pen and, in careful handwriting, added his name to the list: Sato Hiroshi, piano. Hiroshi regretted signing up for the talent showcase almost immediately. By the next morning, as he arranged mackerel on beds of ice, he was already crafting excuses to withdraw his name. A family emergency, perhaps, or a sudden injury to his hand. Anything to avoid standing before the neighborhood exposed and vulnerable. "Hey, Fishman," a teenage voice cut through his thoughts. Hiroshi looked up to see one of the boys who had filmed him for their social media challenge. His stomach tightened. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. To his surprise, the boy looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I wanted to apologize. For before. With the video and stuff." Hiroshi blinked, certain he had misheard. "What?" my mom found out. She was really mad. The boy grimaced. "She made me volunteer for the festival setup as punishment. And apologize to you." "Oh." Hiroshi wasn't sure how to respond. "Well, thank you for apologizing. Whatever." The boy turned to leave, then hesitated. "Is it true you're playing piano at the festival?" Word traveled fast in their small community. "I'm considering it." "That's cool, I guess." The boy shrugged with forced casualness. "I'm in a band." "We're playing too. What instrument do you play?" "Guitar." For the first time, a spark of genuine enthusiasm broke through the boy's carefully maintained indifference. "Electric." "I write songs too." Hiroshi nodded. "That's impressive. Writing your own music, it's nothing special." But the boy stood a little straighter. "Anyway, sorry again. See you at the festival, maybe." As the boy walked away, Hiroshi realized with a start that they had just had a normal conversation. No mockery, no wrinkled nose, no comments about his smell. Just two musicians of sorts acknowledging each other. Over the next few days, Hiroshi noticed other small changes. Customers at the market who had previously kept their distance now sometimes mentioned his piano playing. "We heard you're quite talented, Sato-san," they would say, or, "My daughter takes lessons at the community center. She says she can hear you play sometimes." Even more surprising were the people who confessed to their own hidden talents. The stern-faced office worker who bought Yellowtail every Friday mentioned that he carved wooden birds as a hobby. The young mother with twin toddlers had once been a competitive ballroom dancer. The elderly man who rarely spoke revealed that he had published poetry in his youth. It was as if Hiroshi's decision to step outside his designated role, fishmonger, smelly but necessary, had given others permission to reveal the fullness of their own lives. 1 week before the festival, Tanaka stopped by the market with unexpected news. "The talent showcase is the talk of the neighborhood," he said. "Tickets are selling out." "Tickets?" Hiroshi nearly dropped the knife he was using to fillet a sea bass. "I thought it was just an informal community event." "It was supposed to be," Tanaka replied. "But then so many people wanted to attend that we had to move it to the high school auditorium and sell tickets to cover the cost. It's for a good cause. All proceeds go to renovating the community center." Hiroshi felt dizzy. "How many people will be there?" "The auditorium seats about 300, Tanaka said casually, as if this were a small, insignificant number. "Hey, are you all right? You look pale." 300 people, Hiroshi repeated faintly. "I can't do it. I need to withdraw." Tanaka's expression grew serious. "Listen, Hiroshi, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. But before you decide, there's something you should know." "What?" "After the Nakamuras told their friends about having tea with you, after people heard you playing at the community center, well, a lot of folks around here feel like they're seeing their neighbor for the first time. Not just the fish seller, but the whole person. It's making them think about how many others they might have misjudged or overlooked." Hiroshi said nothing, absorbing this. "You're changing things. Tanaka continued. Just by being yourself. That's rare and valuable. That evening, instead of going directly to the community center, Hiroshi took a detour to the high school. The main building was closed, but the auditorium was accessible from a side entrance. He slipped inside, finding the cavernous space empty and dimly lit by security lighting. The stage loomed before him, vast and intimidating. Hiroshi walked slowly down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing. 300 seats surrounded him, each one representing a person who would be watching, listening, judging. When he reached the stage, he stood looking up at it for a long moment before climbing the side steps. The grand piano was already there, its polished black surface gleaming even in the low light, much larger and more imposing than the upright at the community center. Hiroshi approached it cautiously as if it might bite. He lifted the cover and touched a key, its sound resonating through the empty auditorium. Then another key and another until he was playing a simple scale, testing the instrument's voice. It was magnificent, responsive and rich, with a depth the community center's piano couldn't match. Hiroshi sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he and the piano became acquainted. He was so absorbed in the music that he didn't notice someone had entered the auditorium until he finished a piece and heard soft applause. Startled, he looked up to see a woman standing in the center aisle. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, walking toward the stage. "I'm Miyamoto from the high school music department. I heard someone playing and came to investigate." "I apologize for intruding," Hiroshi said quickly, standing up. "I'm part of the community talent showcase and I just wanted to see the space. No need to apologize. That was lovely." She tilted her head, studying him. Chopin, wasn't it? Nocturne in E-flat major. Hiroshi nodded, surprised by her recognition. "It's one of my favorites to teach advanced students," she explained. "You play with remarkable feeling, though I detect some technical hesitations. Are you self-taught?" "My grandmother taught me as a child," Hiroshi replied. "But I stopped playing for many years. I've only recently started again." "Well, you've retained a great deal." She gestured to the piano. "Would you like some tips for performing on this particular instrument? It has its quirks." For the next hour, Miyamoto guided Hiroshi through the nuances of the grand piano, how its action differed from an upright, how to use the pedals most effectively, how to project in the large space of the auditorium. "The most important thing to remember," she said as they were finishing, "is that music is communication. You're not just playing notes. You're speaking to the audience. What do you want to say to them?" Hiroshi considered this. "I'm not sure. I haven't thought of it that way. Think about it before the showcase," she advised. "It will make all the difference." As the festival drew nearer, Hiroshi found his practice sessions at the community center increasingly interrupted by well-wishers and curious neighbors. Everyone, it seemed, had heard that the quiet Fishmonger would be performing, and everyone had an opinion or suggestion to offer. "You should wear a suit," one elderly woman advised. "My grandson has one he's outgrown that might fit you." "My niece is bringing a bouquet to throw onto the stage after you play," another told him. "I hope you don't mind. Will you play something lively?" "My children get restless with classical music," a young father asked. Hiroshi received all these comments with polite nods, but inwardly, the pressure mounted. How could he possibly meet all these expectations? He was just a fishmonger who happened to remember how to play the piano, not a real musician. 3 days before the showcase, he nearly broke. A group of middle school students had been watching him practice, whispering and giggling among themselves. When they left, one dropped a crumpled piece of paper. Hiroshi found it later, a crude cartoon of a man at a piano with stink lines coming off him, fish swimming around his head. He sat staring at the drawing, his chest tight. All the old shame came flooding back. Who was he kidding? No matter what he played, no matter how well he played it, to many he would always be the smelly fish man. Perhaps it was better to withdraw now, to retreat back into the safety of his limited role in the community. That night, he didn't go to the community center. Instead, he walked to the harbor where fishing boats were returning with their day's catch. The salty air and the sounds of the water usually calmed him, reminded him of the continuity of his chosen work, his place in the chain that brought food from sea to table. "Thought I might find you here," a voice said. Hiroshi turned to see Nakamura, the elderly man whose wife had held his hands and declared them worthy of respect. I needed to think, Hiroshi said simply. Nakamura nodded, gazing out at the boats. When I was a young man, I wanted to be a doctor. I studied hard, but I failed the entrance exams twice. I settled for becoming a pharmacist instead. Not as prestigious, not my dream, but a good life. Hiroshi waited, sensing there was more to the story. For years, I felt like a failure. Like I had settled for less than I deserved, less than I was capable of. Then one day, a mother came into my shop with a very sick child. The doctor had prescribed medication, but the child was getting worse. I recognized a potential drug interaction that the doctor had missed. I called him, suggested an alternative. The child recovered. Nakamura turned to face Hiroshi. That day I realized something important. We don't always get to choose our paths in life, but we always get to choose how we walk them. They stood in silence for a while, watching the boats and the darkening sky. I found this offensive drawing today, Hiroshi finally said, pulling the crumpled paper from his pocket. It reminded me of what people really think of me. Nakamura glanced at it, then handed it back. Some people, perhaps, not all. And even those who think that way now might change their minds. Like that boy who came to apologize to you. Hiroshi looked at him in surprise. How did you know about that? Word travels, Nakamura said with a small smile. Just as word has traveled about the fishmonger who plays piano like an angel. My wife says you have a gift that has nothing to do with fish or smell or what people think of you. A gift that's yours alone to give or withhold. As Hiroshi walked home that night, he thought about gifts and choices and the paths we walk. He thought about his grandmother, who had given him music when he had little else. He thought about the 300 people who would sit in that auditorium, some expecting beauty, some perhaps expecting to be amused by his failure. And he thought about what he wanted to say to them through his music. By the time he reached his apartment, he knew exactly which piece he would play. Not the safe choice, not the technically simple one, but the one that spoke most truly of who he was and what he had experienced. It would be difficult. He might make mistakes, but for once the possibility of imperfection didn't terrify him quite as much as it once had. The day of the talent showcase arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of chrysanthemums from the flower shop down the street. Hiroshi closed his stall at the market earlier than usual, leaving a handwritten sign, "Closed for community festival. See you tomorrow." At home, he stood in front of his small bathroom mirror, studying his reflection. The face that looked back at him was familiar, yet somehow different. The same weathered skin, the same tired eyes, but something had changed in their expression. A steadiness, perhaps, a certainty that hadn't been there before. From his closet, he pulled out an item he hadn't worn in years. A proper suit, dark navy, purchased for his father's funeral and unworn since. It fit more snugly than it once had, but well enough. He added a white shirt and a simple tie, then studied the effect. "You look like someone else," he told his reflection, but that wasn't quite right. He looked, for perhaps the first time in decades, like his complete self, not just the fishmonger, but the man who existed beyond his work. As Hiroshi left his apartment, he was surprised to find Tanaka waiting outside, dressed in his own suit. "Thought you might like a walking companion," Tanaka said casually. "It's not every day a friend makes his musical debut." Hiroshi felt a rush of gratitude for this simple act of support. "Thank you." They walked to the high school together, Tanaka chatting about festival preparations to fill the silence. When they arrived, the parking lot was already filling with cars and people in their weekend best, streaming toward the auditorium. "Looks like a full house," Tanaka remarked. "I should find my seat." "You know where to go?" Hiroshi nodded. "Performers enter through the side door." "Good luck," Tanaka said, squeezing his shoulder briefly before heading toward the main entrance. Backstage was a flurry of activity. Student volunteers with clipboards, performers warming up or pacing nervously, family members making last-minute adjustments to costumes and instruments. Hiroshi found a quiet corner to sit, closing his eyes briefly, running through the piece in his mind as he had practiced doing all week. "Sato-san?" A student volunteer approached with a program in hand. "You're number 8 in the lineup right after intermission. You'll be the first performer of the second half." Hiroshi took the program, noting his name printed there among the others. Sato Hiroshi, piano solo, Chopin. Seeing it in black and white made it suddenly, irrevocably real. The showcase began and Hiroshi watched from the wings as each performer took their turn, the children's dance group in matching outfits, the elderly brothers who performed traditional comic storytelling, the teenage rock band, including the boy who had apologized to him, playing an original song with more enthusiasm than skill. The audience applauded warmly for each act, regardless of professional quality. This wasn't about perfection, Hiroshi reminded himself. It was about community, about sharing what made them more than just neighbors passing on the street. During intermission, he stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He breathed deeply, trying to calm his racing heart. Nervous? Hiroshi turned to find Miyamoto, the music teacher, standing nearby. Terrified, he admitted. She smiled sympathetically. Everyone gets nervous, even professionals who've performed hundreds of times. What if I make mistakes? You will, she said matter-of-factly. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll let those mistakes define the performance. Before he could respond, a stagehand called from the doorway. 5 minutes to the second half. Miyamoto gave him an encouraging nod. Remember what we talked about. Music is communication. Speak from your heart, and they'll hear you. The backstage area was quieter now as performers gathered around a small monitor showing the stage. The audience was returning to their seats, program booklets rustling, conversations buzzing. Then the house lights dimmed and the stage lights brightened. The student volunteer touched Hiroshi's elbow. You're up, Sato-san. Walking onto that stage was the longest journey of Hiroshi's life. Each step seemed to take an eternity as he moved from the protective darkness of the wings into the unforgiving brightness of the spotlights. The grand piano waited at center stage, its lid raised, its presence commanding. As he crossed to the bench, he heard the first whispers ripple through the audience. Isn't that the fish seller? The one from Shinagawa Market? I didn't know he played piano. Hiroshi sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. The whispers continued, louder now, as recognition spread through the audience. He glanced up briefly and saw hundreds of faces watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to anticipation. In the front row, he spotted Mrs. Nakamura in a wheelchair, her husband beside her. They both nodded encouragingly. A few rows back, he saw the calligraphy ladies, and scattered throughout were familiar faces from the market, customers, fellow vendors, neighbors who had passed his stall for years without really seeing him. Hiroshi closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece he had chosen was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, more difficult than the nocturne he had practiced initially, with its contrasting moods, its technical challenges, its emotional depth. It began softly, almost tentatively, like a question being asked. For the first few measures, his fingers were stiff with nerves, and he hit a wrong note that made him wince internally. But then as the music began to flow through him, something shifted. He stopped thinking about the audience, about what they might be seeing or smelling or thinking. He stopped worrying about mistakes or judgment or expectations. He simply played. The ballad unfolded like a story, his story in a way, beginning in uncertainty, building to moments of delicate beauty, then swelling to passionate intensity. His body swayed with the music, his face reflecting the changing emotions of the piece. When he reached the more technically demanding passages, his fingers moved with a dexterity that surprised even himself, as if they remembered things his conscious mind had forgotten. He made mistakes. Yes, a missed note here, a blurred passage there, but they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the language he was speaking through the piano, the truth he was telling about himself. I am more than you thought I was. I am more than I thought I was. As the piece approached its dramatic conclusion, Hiroshi felt tears on his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. They were part of his performance, too, part of what he was giving to this audience that had so often looked past him, or worse, looked down on him. The final chords resonated through the auditorium, powerful and definitive. Then silence, a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. Hiroshi opened his eyes, his hands still resting on the keys. For one terrible moment, he thought they hadn't understood, that they were sitting in shocked disappointment at the fishmonger, who had dared to think he could play Chopin. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Another joined, and another, until the applause swelled into a wave that crashed over him, along with cheers and whistles and even a few audible sobs. In the front row, Mrs. Nakamura was wiping her eyes while her husband beamed with pride. The calligraphy ladies were on their feet. Clapping furiously, Hiroshi stood, legs shaking slightly, and bowed deeply to the audience, not the quick, perfunctory bow he gave customers at the market, but a proper, respectful acknowledgement of their attention and appreciation. When he straightened, he saw that many were standing now, the applause continuing far longer than he had expected. As he walked off stage, legs still unsteady, he was met by Yoshida, the community center director, her eyes shining. "Sato-san," she said, grasping his hand. "That was magnificent." He shook his head, unable to find words. "No, truly," she insisted. "I've never heard anything like it. You must teach at the center. We'll find a way to make it work around your market hours." "I'm not qualified to teach," he protested weakly. "I'm just a gifted musician," she finished firmly, "who has spent too many years hiding that gift." The rest of the showcase passed in a blur. Hiroshi sat in the audience for the remaining acts, receiving smiles and nods and whispered congratulations from those around him. When the event ended, people approached him in clusters, some who had never spoken to him before, others who had bought fish from him for years. "I had no idea," one woman said, touching his arm. "All this time, will you play at my daughter's wedding?" Another asked. "It's in the spring." "My son needs a piano teacher," a father said. "Someone who plays with feeling, not just technique." Amidst the crowd, Hiroshi spotted the teenage boy who had filmed him for the social media challenge, now awkwardly waiting his turn. "Hey," the boy said when he finally reached Hiroshi. "That was really cool. Way better than our band." "Your band was good too," Hiroshi said honestly. "Original songs are hard to write." "Yeah, well." The boy shuffled his feet. "Maybe sometime you could listen to some of my other songs. Tell me what you think. Music to music, you know?" "I'd like that," Hiroshi said, surprised to realize he meant it. Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the cleanup crews had finished their work, Hiroshi found himself walking slowly home through the quiet streets. The night air was cool against his face, stars visible despite the city lights. He felt different somehow, lighter, as if a weight he had carried for so many years had finally been set down. Tomorrow he would return to the market, arrange his fish on beds of ice, serve his customers with the same care he always had. His hands would still smell of the sea no matter how he scrubbed them, but now everyone knew that those same hands could create beauty. And more importantly, he knew it too. As he reached his apartment building, Hiroshi paused, looking up at the night sky. His grandmother had once told him that music was a conversation with the universe. Tonight, for the first time, he felt he had truly spoken and been heard, and that made all the difference.